Welcome to Shaken and Disturbed, everybody. I am Daryn Carp here with John Thrasher
Hey
and
y'all.
hey y'all, he's country today. But welcome. Smash that subscribe button, which is down here, as you can see, as I always say. Sometimes it's
You
up here, but
love
it's
that.
it's down
Yeah.
here. I like doing the little like fingery things,
Yeah.
as a good
Excuse
lesbian
me?
does. But sorry.
Oh,
John, today's actually a very big day because
yeah.
I love when we get to cover
Me.
documentaries. I love that we get to cover something different. And I love that when we cover cases that people think have already been adjudicated, which they have already been adjudicated, but giving our sort of unfiltered opinion. And so today we are covering the new Netflix documentary entitled The Menendez Brothers. And this is the documentary, to be clear, not the
Yes.
scripted series Monsters, which is also out on Netflix, which is a scripted series about the Menendez brothers, which I believe that Ryan Murphy did not get their permission for. And it's something like 8 episodes, but we're not going to be talking about the scripted series. I prefer not to do that just because there's too much creative license with it. And it's really about
Yeah.
entertainment as opposed to just the case. And so
Exactly.
this documentary is out on Netflix. Even though we were releasing it, Netflix did us the courtesy of giving us the screeners early. So we highly
Yes.
encourage everyone to watch
Oh,
this. Thank you. It is a full documentary, not any type of parts, just 2 hours basically. Comes out Monday, October 7th. And I was really excited that Netflix let us watch this beforehand because this is what
yes.
I was super
Thank
excited
you.
about. Now, John, just before we get into this, and we want to give background of the case for those who hadn't heard it. And let me
Quick
just tell you, as
refresh.
someone who lived it, who's covered this case before, I learned a
Yeah.
lot from this documentary. But
Yeah,
did
me
you
too.
watch Monsters? Have you? Do you
No.
plan on it? Any
No.
interest?
I might. I think, we mentioned on the Patreon NMR that just went out recently. I mentioned it at least that, everyone's asking me about that documentary. Or I mean the
So many
the
people.
Monsters scripted show. Yeah, like my coworkers, my friends, my family. I listen, we do so much true crime throughout the week. I'm If we're not recording an episode, we're working on another one. We're looking at what you guys are saying on Patreon. I don't really like the the scripted parts of
Me
true
neither.
crime, like trying to turn it into that. I get it. Don't get me wrong. I understand why there's an appetite for these types of shows, but I just don't really want to sit down and like live it that way, you know?
Yeah, like I really liked his Versace one.
Yeah.
With Darren Chris, I liked
Yeah.
that, but I would have preferred a documentary on it. Just because when we're talking about this stuff, and I loved Dahmer on Netflix. I thought that was
Yeah.
so well done with EC Nash. I thought it was riveting.
Emmy
Um,
winning. Yeah.
Emmy when I think it was called Monster, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think this is a like the new season of it, if that makes sense.
It
New
was so
series.
good. I thought that was awesome, probably because there've been so many documentaries about it. What kind
Yeah.
of pushed me off a little bit of watching the scripted series is like, and I could be wrong about this, but finding out that Erik and Lyle didn't want it to be done and Ryan like didn't really confront
Yeah.
them about it made me feel like, and that's fine, right? Because the story is out there, but it also made me feel like, okay, this isn't going to really be a reflection of this is just the story of them killing their parents.
Right.
There's too much creative license here, and I don't really want to be swayed about my opinion of the case by watching the scripted series.
I know, and it's so funny. So do you remember the movie I, Tanya,
Of
which was the
course,
Tanya Harding movie?
of
So
course,
like that movie was not a documentary. That was a
with Margot Robbie.
biopic. Yeah, with Margot
Hmm.
Robbie. And I remember a friend of mine talking to me about that movie as if it was like a documentary,
Fact.
firsthand
Yeah.
account of Tanya Harding's life. And I'm like, you have to understand, like, that is a scripted show. There are people writing the script that Margot is acting like. And I think, we'll talk a little bit about how the media played into this case and others as well. But like, there is this new thing kind of emerging over the last several years now where media is playing another role in true crime, which is not true crime, which is scripted series telling a narrative that may or may not, be the actual truth. It's meant, like you said, meant to entertain. So I'm a little worried about that to some degree, but I understand why there's an appetite for it.
Yeah.
People want to watch the dramatizations of what happened and maybe learn something along the way. But when you hear that Erik and Lyle didn't weigh in on this and I think aren't happy about it, well, what purpose or what is the purpose of it then other than the super the entertainment value?
Yeah, and like, listen, a well done series is a well done series. Like, I
Yeah,
don't
for
want to
sure.
begrudge Ryan Murphy that, but I'm curious because I believe we have covered this case before, maybe on Martinis and Murder,
We did. I
perhaps.
have
But
some details about that actually.
oh, okay, great. Because
Yeah.
so I had like sort of even just thinking about till then, like I remember sort of walking away from covering that case. And again, I live in California now. This happened in Beverly Hills. They lived in Marina Del Rey. I see their old apartment building
Oh, you
from my
do?
apartment building. So there's like, I don't know, I just think about that a lot. Not that that relates me to the case. And I was obviously very young when all of this went down. Obviously, they were killed in 1989. I was born in 1988. But this was certainly what
Yeah.
this was. I kind of forget that this was like the launching pad for OJ. This was really
I
like that.
know. That was
It related
shocking.
so heavily. But
Yeah.
my pre-watch thoughts, I was excited about
Yeah.
this documentary, but my pre-watch thoughts, and I've sort of said this before, um, are that Erik and Lyle have served their time. And I think knowing what I learned covering in a Martinis and Murder was how abused that they actually were, and
Yeah.
how a little bit a la Gypsy Rose, it was a little bit like
Yes,
they
I had
felt
the
like they
same
had
thoughts.
no other option and that they were
Yeah.
young and that a lot of people aren't thinking to just run away, in psychological. I just remember thinking like it's a little Stockholm syndrome, like Elizabeth Smart could have run away a million times, but she didn't want to because she was so enthralled with her captor. Like, and it's not because Elizabeth Smart was stupid,
No, it
like
was a psychological manipulation. Right.
so much brainwashing can happen. I mean, that's the reason cults can form. I mean, hello, Mother God, Father God. Like this is
Yeah.
so all of this really blended together, and I think the media played a huge role, and also them being rich and fairly good looking didn't help their case, unfortunately, coming out of O.J. Simpson. But I have thought before watching this documentary that yes, they were obviously guilty of killing their parents, but it was nuanced. And I think after 34 years of them being in prison, 35 now, um, they've served their time. I don't think
And
that they
this
are
was
menaces to
before you
society
watched.
anyway. This was before I
Okay.
watched, where I thought
Yeah.
they served. I think
Yeah.
we're good on this now. I think we're good on this knowing what we know.
Yeah. I had a similar thought. I'll just, by the way, we did cover, it was very early on in our Martinis and Murder Time, September 2017. We covered the Menendez brothers.
Wow.
And I don't even really remember it. So I'm going to have to go back and listen to that episode of Martinis and Murder, assuming that network and everything is still happening. But yeah, my pre-watch thoughts were I hadn't heard about the case that much lately.
Sure.
Um, I know that recently Rosie O'Donnell, and I kind of was expecting this to come out in the documentary, but it didn't. Rosie O'Donnell had recently shared that Lyle Menendez had written her a letter when he was in prison. Rosie has gone on record many times about some abuse that she's handled in her life, or not handled, but was the victim of in her life. And Lyle was reaching out to her about things like that. And
Yeah.
I found that kind of fascinating. And I was like, oh, yeah, the Menendez brothers. And then, because there's just so many different things going on in the world of true crime, I kind of like slipped my mind a little bit. So yeah, anyway, my point is that that was a recent like kind of flag about the Menendez brothers. Otherwise, I knew the basics of the case. I knew about some of the sexual abuse, which we'll talk about, but I didn't know a lot of the nuance, and I had not seen. Well, this is a really important part. I had not seen really any of the testimony from the
That's
courtroom.
the biggest thing about this documentary, which I know
Yeah,
we're going to get into, but I will say
yeah,
the most recent resurgence, which they also mention in this doc, is that the 2024, let's say, although let's just
hmm
say, like in light of 2020, the new generation of people are looking at true crime a little bit differently. And
Oh,
that's
for
why it's sort of
sure.
resurfaced that a lot of these younger generations are being like taking a lot of note on child abuse, especially against boys and not just
Oh,
women.
yeah.
And so, which often goes overlooked, especially with rich people. No one wants to think about a millionaire sexually assaulting his boys continually over the years when he's such a man of the community and lives in Beverly Hills and I'm sure donates to campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. So Gen Z, I credit them, or just the TikTok generation, if you will, of taking a second look at this case and then bringing it to the forefront of all of our minds, which is, I think, one of the reasons, probably Netflix, one of the reasons why Murphy wanted to do Monsters, and probably one of the reasons Netflix came out of the stock in the first place. I don't know, but I'm just kind of guessing. But
Yeah.
John, we should give like we should just give like a quick download of the case, just
Yes.
so people are
Yes.
aware of the facts. We don't have to go in through every little thing. You
Yeah.
should definitely watch this documentary for sure. The testimonies is the best part, but let's just start with a little bit of the background for those who
Yeah.
might not
So
be familiar.
exactly, and thank you for that. So here's some thoughts and details about the basics, the outline of the case, if you will. So Lyle and Erik Menendez, they're two brothers, as Daryn mentioned. They're from Beverly Hills. They were convicted of the 1989 murder of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. Jose was a wealthy entertainment executive. He had also
Which I didn't
been
know. I actually did not know that. I don't remember learning that.
I remember hearing that, and then I forgot that he was like CEO or whatever it was. I'm forgetting exactly his title of Hertz, the car rental company.
Which ends up
Like
hiring
what?
OJ Simpson,
I
which we have to
know.
get to, but they end up
Yes, we
hiring OJ
will.
Simpson. But then he's also the CEO of like RCA Records.
RCA Records, exactly.
So he just
And
does crazy stuff. Crazy
yeah,
stuff.
and their killings, shocked the nation due to, of course, the brutality, which we will definitely get to as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
No,
Daryn, you
Rodney
can tell a
King
little bit more.
obviously Rodney King actually plays like a big role, oddly enough, and certainly OJ, but in this, and I didn't realize how much of an overlap there really was with a lot of these cases. Just the OJ and the Hertz thing of it all is kind of
Yeah,
crazy. But
yeah.
so the crime essentially is that like these brothers, Lyle and Erik, 18 and 21 at the time, shot their parents in their Beverly Hills home, claiming they feared for their lives after years and years of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse at the hands of their father, Jose.
Right.
And what's interesting here is that certainly in the murder scene, I believe Jose and Kitty were just like sitting on their couch.
Yep.
So there wasn't any like defensive wounds that they could come at. So one of the things I learned from this doc, and we're going to get into it, is about like impassive self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
And an impassive thing with an M is in Mary, not impassive, but impassive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting kind of how it's called, sorry, not impassive, imperfect
Oh,
self-defense,
imperfect.
excuse me,
Yes, yes.
imperfect self-defense, where the defendants honestly believe that they were in danger, whereas essentially like
Mm-hmm.
it's either them or me in this moment, even there's no act of violence being committed. It's
Towards
sort of like a
them. Yeah.
preemption of that. And so that's really the crime. They obfuscate the truth at first, and then Lyle and Erik kind of keep it together. A letter is found that Lyle had written Erik. Erik did not burn it like he should have, where Lyle admits to guilt of killing their parents. And so
Exactly.
that is why they get on trial for it. But the interesting thing that they mention in this doc, which I believe Erik was talking about, is when the boys call the police, they're claiming they're coming home from the movie theater. When the boys called the police to say that their parents had been shot, and the police come to the house and test everything. Erik's like, if they had tested our hands, we would have had gunpowder residue all over our hands. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't ask us any questions. They didn't test us. They weren't even suspects. And usually at a home invasion like this, the family is usually the first people to go towards.
Yeah.
I think in part because it was Beverly Hills. These boys were really distraught. I'm sort of two mindsets where like these brothers claim to have found their parents dead. Is it they're in their best interest to then be questioned underneath the spotlight forever? Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't really know how the police wanted to handle it, but I would think that in any other maybe not so affluent neighborhood, the police would have handled this a little bit differently. But Erik and Lyle say basically they were so fucking freaked out. If the police had pushed them at all, they would have arrested them immediately that night.
Yeah, they do say that in the documentary. Also, the shell casings from the bullets were in the car.
Yeah,
So
he's like, I had shell
so
casings everywhere. We picked up all the shell casings. They never looked at anything.
yeah, and for me, I'm like, how does this happen? I don't know. It's just crazy to me. We'll continue here with some of the go ahead.
And another thing is, and I don't want to give this all away, but Erik also admits that when he's talking to the police about it in his
Hmm.
testimony, that he's like, yeah, it was very smoky in the room, like from all the
Oh yeah,
gunpowder
that's right.
smoke. And like that literally would have been impossible unless they were the ones to shoot off the gun or at least had been in the room when their parents were
Yeah,
murdered and saw
right.
someone shoot it because it's not like the gun smoke like stays around. That's
Stays.
almost like
Yeah.
a very live scene. So it would have been impossible, and the police didn't really question them on that. It would have been impossible for them not to have
Yeah.
been in the room when it happened, essentially, and the
And I
police
want to
never questioned them on it.
and I want to say that from what I understand from the way they were talking about it in this documentary, because you do hear from both Lyle and Erik, by the way, you guys, from prison, they phone in. Um, it didn't really seem like they were trying too hard to cover it up. Like, yeah, they were
No.
living their lives and, you know, but they weren't necessarily like hiding things. It just seemed almost like, I mean, they were, I shouldn't say that, but it almost seemed like the stupidity of the police department and the investigation was just like, I don't know, looking in the wrong direction so perfectly every single time. And like, what are they going to do? Like, raise their hand and say, actually, never mind, we did it if they weren't going to originally get caught? No one's going to do that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. It's weird how that played out.
And obviously, like after this goes down, Lyle and Erik, this is why in the doc they show a lot of sort of pop culture movements of Jay Leno making fun of these guys and
Hmm.
Sandra Bernhard making, and sort of them being this like joke of the century a little bit, because they go out and they buy Rolexes and a Porsche and a Jeep and are living this really extravagant sort of lifestyle. So everyone was like, they only killed their parents for the money. They only did it for the money, which is I always found a little odd because they were also supposed to be the sole inheritors of the wealth anyway. So
Right.
I don't really understand what the point of killing for money when the money was already theirs.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
when they're talking about the family and keeping up appearances, and certainly let me tell you something, in LA and Beverly Hills, it's all about keeping up with the
Hello.
Joneses.
That's why we
Even
moved
it,
her out there so she can tell you guys this.
exactly, but like if you can't afford the Rolex,
Well,
don't
they say
bother going
this.
into the store, like don't bother even walking on Rodeo Drive, essentially.
Yeah, and they said somebody, I don't know who it was in the documentary, said something like this that really was like, "Oh yeah, that's true," which was that LA, especially in the 90s, was very much like greed is gold. Or they were saying that like it was okay to be
It's
greedy and rich and
flashy.
flaunt your
Yes.
world around. And like, that ebbs and flows, I'd say through the decades, but at this time specifically, it really was something that was part of the culture and part of society in LA. Let's jump a little bit ahead now. We're just gonna, and by the way, we're gonna get back to documentary talk. I just want to let's get through the like details so that
Yeah.
those of you who may not
Sorry.
know, no, no, you're good. But for listeners who may not know, so yes, they eventually they are discovered to have been the killers. They admit their guilt. So this is
They admit
unlike the
it.
Scott Peterson thing, where like the documentary was like, did he or didn't he? No, we know from the very get
We know
go
who
they
did it.
definitely did. It's about the degree in which they will be convicted. Anyway, first trial happens between 93 and 94. The first trial resulted in two separate juries for each brother, both of which were deadlocked, which led to a mistrial. I didn't even know this, by the way. I should know
I
this,
didn't
but
realize there was
didn't
two
realize there
trials
was two.
either.
No,
I did not realize that there was two. I also didn't and I didn't realize the heavy jury deliberation that went down.
right, exactly. Again, we're going to get through just the basics here, and then we're going to react to things about the trial and
Yeah.
everything so that it makes sense. But yes, and so their defense in the first trial focused very heavily on the alleged abuse, and gaining some public sympathy. I mean, one of the things that is mentioned in this documentary is this whole trial, the entire thing was televised on court
It's
TV
one of
on a
the
daily basis.
It was one of the first ones. I had the same thing. I
Yeah,
mean, this was when Court TV, this is how true crime be kind of came like this soap opera of our time. I mean, this is why the
appointment
genre
television. Yeah,
appointment television, but this is why there became an entertainment value in this stuff. Not that people weren't interested in sensationalist news before, Son of Sam, these types of
of
things, but
course. Yeah,
being televised is pretty massive because now
yeah.
sort of the worst day of your life is now on public display and you're trying to defend yourself in front of the public eye. Everything's going to be scrutinized. How is he
Mm-hmm.
crying? Is he fake? Is he yawning? Is he looking at this? Is he looking at
Mm-hmm.
that? I mean, this was the first celebrity trial. And if you asked me gun to my head, I would have said it was OJ.
Yeah, I know.
So
Same for
I did
sure.
not know, even though I had seen clips of the testimony, I guess I didn't even really put two and two together. But obviously, these brothers became a media sensation. They're good looking. They came from a wealthy family. They lived in Beverly Hills. Um, some people empathize with their claims of abuse. I would think after watching the testimony footage, and
Yeah, I
granted,
want to
there
get
are,
to that specifically.
and,
Yeah.
and we will, there were amazing, it would be incredible if they were acting this out,
Hmm.
specifically the claims of their family. But So there was the people who empathized with them being sexually abused and tortured their whole lives. And then there's the other half, which still exists today, which are just like, they're wealthy, they're greedy, they spoiled little fucking brats who just wanted to kill their parents for the money, who didn't give a shit about them. They just wanted to be on their own and yada, yada, yada. So you always have those factions. I think even the doc showed some of those people who still have those reactions to a lot of those things, but
Yeah.
essentially they didn't deserve the empathy because they were rich. Money makes people, no one feels empathy for rich people a lot of the times, especially in these court cases. They just don't.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I want to say one other thing too, as we talk about the media reaction and the way public perception was, I don't know if it was necessarily influencing the jurors, of course, but think about this. Okay, so 1990s, early 90s or whatever, think about the TV, okay? The internet hadn't quite taken off yet. Dial up hadn't quite gone into mainstream. So you know, up through this time period, people were getting their news and getting their entertainment pretty much solely from televisions and movie theaters and of course live events, but let's think about
And
screens for a second.
papers. Yeah, yeah, right, exactly.
Exactly.
Magazines. Yeah.
But in terms of screens and being entertained by a screen, you turned on the television, you were watching TV. Reality TV wasn't even a thing at this point. So you're watching scripted shows or movies constantly on your television and in the movie theaters. Nowadays, we have 5,000 different screens. Our people of our generation and people who grew up on screens, I guess you could say, know how to discern things differently. When you're looking at a screen, if you're watching this right now on YouTube, Daryn and I talking, you know what you're watching. You know that the information we're sharing to you and communicating to you is two real life people having a conversation. But like in the early 90s, to have court TV live streaming, essentially live court hearings onto a TV that everyone at that point had only associated with entertainment, okay, and being told stories and the sensationalism of scripted television. We talked a little bit about this on NMR on Patreon if you want to go listen to it. To me, it only makes sense that people would do this because you have to think about the psyche and how you would associate what you're watching on a television screen as entertainment. It's like you almost
Yeah.
can't blame society for that at that point for not really being able to discern like the human element about what they were watching because that's all they've ever known. That's the only life you've ever learned
And it's
about
important to note,
television.
and that's a good point. Take a drink. But the
Throwback.
the first, keep in mind the first trial happened in 93, 94. OJ's just now starting.
That's
Like
right. Yeah.
the OJ thing is now in the ether, and
Yeah.
that watching him on the Ford Bronco in 94, I think it was 94, 96, 94.
94. Yeah.
That is becoming a thing in of its own. So these trials, these cases are kind of happening at the same time in the same place
Yeah.
during this sort of like really odd time, just politically and odd time societally, obviously Rodney King murders. But you're right. I mean, the public is primed. And I think if I had been I think if I had been conscious at the time or been 36 at the time watching this trial, I can't confidently say I wouldn't have said these were just spoiled
Yeah.
bratty boys who just wanted to get away with it. Like that would be an easy narrative for me. Only when I really watched the footage of them talking about their life and then the other testimonies from the family members did I start to really understand the inherent biases we have when we're just watching something for entertainment.
100%. And to move on here with the time frame for the background information, we'll get back to this. The second trial was a completely different tone, with the abuse claims completely being downplayed. In fact, the judge did not allow most of the evidence and testimony around that in this second
Which is
trial.
insane. You can tell.
Insane.
Yes, keep going.
And the
Yeah.
focus was shifting more towards, of course, premeditated murder. The judge limited the defense ability to bring up any of this, as I just said, nearly as extensively as it was in the first trial.
Which is
Um,
crazy because of like a premeditated murder here can still be self-defense if you believe that your life is at risk and you're trying to figure out how the fuck you can save yourself. I mean, in the second trial, which is important to mention that this was payback, I think what
Yeah.
they found OJ not guilty.
Right.
The public
Let's
would
talk about that here for sure. So
the
first trial happens, they
first
get a
trial happens.
mistrial.
First trial happens. And
Then it's like, what the fuck?
right.
Sorry, not to
Then
interrupt
they
you, but
want
go ahead.
retribution. Before the second trial, OJ is found not guilty.
Right.
The not guilty heard around the world, and people are pissed because we all know OJ did it, right? Like we all know he did it. This was in response to Rodney King. ESPN came out with a great documentary about this, where even jurors admitted that they found him not guilty. If he had been a white man, it probably would have been different. But just like OJ got lucky given the time frame. Now, given this, the second trial is about to go down for the Menendez brothers, and the public and the courts are pissed that they didn't get to put away a murderer. So they're fuming. They need a conviction. They want a conviction.
Right.
Just for the public, they need a conviction, whether or not it's true, which is how media plays such a big, important role in
Yeah.
convicting people, I think, just for the satisfaction of getting the public to shut the fuck up and just claiming that they found someone, that they don't really care about the evidence. So
Yeah.
in this second trial, which took place between 95 and 96, both brothers somehow, after a hung jury, and the jury deliberating for a month.
A month. Yeah.
A month, which is very important. I mean, if you are deliberating in a jury for a month, it's not clear cut
There
then that this
must be some
person is
reasonable
guilty.
doubt. Yeah, exactly.
There would have to be. I
Yeah.
mean, or you're trying to convince yourself that there isn't. But both brothers were convicted of first
That's a
degree
good point.
murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which also seems kind of harsh considering the deliberations here. And the prosecution argued that they killed their parents to inherit their family fortune, which doesn't really make sense to me. This essentially included, I believe, a $14 million estate that they were set
That's
to
right.
inherit, which they would have inherited anyway because they were the sole inheritors.
Right. So what's the motive there? And so, I will say one of the things that really stood out to me for the first time, I kind of made this connection. I was like, how have I not thought about this before? Yes, the public perception of, let's say, the OJ trial, even maybe the first Menendez trial here, is the public perception as it's happening really influencing the trial as it's happening? Maybe not, because, hopefully the jurors are sequestered and you would hope that there's, not a lot of influence and like you can get to a nice not a nice verdict, but what's the word? Like a sound verdict that is unanimous.
Right.
But what the thing that really stuck out to me, and you also just kind of almost made this point for me, was yes, maybe that's true, but you know who's watching from afar? The prosecution and the district attorney, who at the end of it is like, "Oh shit, we really fucked this up. We let OJ get away. I better get something in order so that my career isn't on my legacy isn't on the line here."
It
And
doesn't matter what the
we
truth is, which is why we always say
that's
that
what I
in
was just
court.
going
It
to say.
doesn't fucking matter what the truth is.
It doesn't matter what the truth is to some district attorneys, because if they have back-to-back flops where innocent people are being, let go and vice versa, that's going to look bad on him. That's his personal ego. That's his personal legacy. And I'm like, why does it always have to fall on the shoulders of the district attorneys and the prosecution to like make a career for themselves in that way? Like, shouldn't it matter more about what the truth is and less about your quote unquote record? Like, to me, I was like, how am I just thinking about that for the first time? But
And even the judge to just like dismiss a lot
right,
of the
that's the other
abuse
thing. Yeah.
scandals going through, and
Because
we
he
haven't
needed to
even
make a win. Yeah.
we haven't even talked about the therapist, Dr. Oziel, that treated um
Lyle.
Lyle. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say that treated
Or
Lyle.
wait,
Maybe Erik. I
I
have it in
think
my
it was
notes.
Erik. Yeah, sorry.
Um, we haven't even talked about Dr. Oziel, who was the therapist who was put on the stand to discuss um basically that Erik had admitted that he killed
Yes, that's right.
their family, and then Dr. Oziel tried to get it on tape in order
Right.
to send it to the police, which is just absolutely crazy.
Right.
And Dr. Oziel was clearly a shitty therapist, he said, because when Erik was involved in a burglary when he was a kid, his father forced him to go see a psychiatrist, but the only psychiatrist that he would allow his son to see is one that would report
Mhm.
everything back to himself about what his son said. And Dr. Oziel agreed to sign this document
Yeah.
that said he would do that. So already, this
Shady
was
as hell.
this is like an underground type of therapist, because no fucking therapist would allow this to have gone down.
Yeah, it's true. So just to wrap up the whole case part of this, the Menendez brothers have since made several unsuccessful attempts to appeal their convictions, as we all know, claiming that their defense was improperly handled and that evidence of abuse was not fully considered, which we see, kind of specifically drawn out throughout the documentary.
Yeah.
I want to also just say thank you to Netflix really quickly
Yeah,
because you
thank you. It's
guys.
actually a really well done doc, and thank you, Netflix, for it.
Yeah, it was amazing. And by this isn't the end of the conversation, by the way, but I'm just saying that I want to say thank you because you made this a documentary that was an hour and like 55 minutes, and it was not 99 episodes of, calling a psychic to see what he or she thinks. Like this
Yeah.
was direct from Lyle and Erik. You heard from family, you heard from the prosecutor from the first trial, and you hear from no, you don't hear from, I think, the Menendez from their lawyers, but you hear from that side because Lyle and Erik are telling you about it. But
Yeah.
I just thought it was really well done in that regard. So thank you. Thank you for that. So Daryn, let's get into some of the more I know we've been talking here and there about different kind of
Yeah.
elements from the episode, but um what were your thoughts about Pamela Bosnich, who was the prosecutor, who, is a reliable source, I would say, and you hear a lot in the beginning episode of the episode, not the episode, the documentary, about their strategy and why they were pursuing it. And to some degree, it makes sense, right? It's not a guilty or not guilty. It's really about like, well, what is the charge they're giving here? But what are your thoughts about her?
And does intention matter? I mean, in the
Yeah,
doc, she's obviously a prosecutor. Her job is to
yeah,
find the defendant guilty, prove the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
right,
Her job wasn't that hard here, because they did do it and because they did admit doing it. So,
right.
I can tell in her interviews that she said that the only reason she was even agreeing 34 years later to talk to the documentarians about this was for Kitty Menendez, who was horribly treated by her husband and her
That's
sons.
right.
I have a feeling, I got the impression that Pamela Bosnich still, or Bozanich, whatever, is
Yeah,
still thinks that those boys are spoiled brats and murderers.
yeah,
And they are murderers. They are murderers. Still thinks that they are, should still be in prison and should
yeah,
stay there. I think
yeah,
she definitely feels negatively about them. And that's certainly an opinion to have. She's a prosecutor on the case. I
yeah,
think that that doesn't do the boys justice. I think it was interesting. One of the things that I thought was actually one of the most interesting things about this case was that, which I didn't know, outside of all the sexual abuse that Jose Menendez put his boys through, which really affected Erik. And I think that it had gone on for a lot longer than it went on with Lyle, because Lyle had thought that it had ended with Erik.
yeah, right.
And that was the impetus for the reasoning of them kind of killing their parents.
Yeah,
Um, Two things I found interesting was that the boys, once they realized that they were going to kill their dad, kind of didn't see a way out of having their mom not be a part of it. What they said was like she
yeah,
had to do it because she was so enthralled with him and so involved that kind of they had to go together. They were like a little bit of a package deal. That seemed odd to me, but understanding when the boys were talking about their abuse, and if the father said jump, and the boys,
yeah.
even though they
Oh,
were fully independent men, would just say how high. And they were like, we felt that pull towards him.
yeah,
I believe that. I think that that is 100% true. I think that they were groomed.
of
I think
course.
that it's hard to think about grooming in a rich family with boys. But the really interesting linchpin in it for me, which I thought was so fascinating, was that there were zero character witnesses for Jose and Kitty Menendez. Zero. No
Yeah.
one could say anything nice about Jose Menendez except his secretary.
Which yeah, exactly.
To me, I'm not saying that that makes you a sexual abuser. You could have just been a dick, but to not find one character witness, your own family, the own people who saw
Yeah.
those boys being abused by Jose, which I also think is really interesting that maybe none of them, I'm curious to see if any of them had come forward or done anything, but to not even have one family member,
Yeah. I mean,
uh,
that's crazy. That never happens actually.
abuse has to be important. These boys
Yeah.
have been serving for a long time and have a
Yeah.
shitty life. They got dealt a shitty hand, if you will. Sorry.
No, 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 I agree. And I want to say one thing too about Kitty is like, let's take Lyle and Eric's allegations at face value here. Do you think that the man that's doing this to his children is not,
Doing
abusing
something to
in
wife.
whatever way to with his wife. And I'm not even saying sexually. I'm just saying like when you're that type of abuser where your household and your children, we see in
Are
the testimony, which I want
fearful
to,
of you. Yeah.
I'm sorry,
I said are fearful of you, like
are
scared
so
of you.
fearful of you. And also not even just fearful, but as you were just mentioning the Stockholm syndrome of it all, like they were not only fearful, but they were like willing to serve him and make him happy. Like that's obviously how that has to be how the situation was with his wife. Like so when people look at her, like we see her sister, Kitty's sister, in the documentary, and she just can't believe that her mother can't. I'm sorry, the mother wasn't able to protect her children, but like and again, I understand people of that generation it's not calculating, the math isn't mathing for them, but what we know about abusers is that it's all part of the system. They
All of
are
it.
they are a
They make you feel
victim in
like
and of
you
it.
owe them something, 100%.
Exactly. And she is very likely, we'll never know, but was very likely a victim in and of herself. I mean, my God, I'm sure she has stories that we'll never know that probably would have made Lyle and Eric's situation more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like
Yeah,
believable, whatever,
reputable.
reputable. Yeah. So we have
And
to remember that.
it's
Yeah.
that's huge. I mean, the grooming
Yeah.
thing is a major point. I mean, when Erik is talking about in
Yeah.
graphic
Let's
detail,
let's get
when
into
Erik
that.
is
Yeah.
on the stand, him and Lyle, but I'm talking about Erik specifically because it happened for Erik longer. I think basically he abused Lyle until like 6 to 8 years old. And then once Erik became old enough to abuse, which I guess the sweet spot seems to be 6 years old because that's what Erik and Lyle claimed the abuse started happening. I think he just focused on Erik and could probably manipulate Erik more considering Lyle was older and he had a little bit more macho-ness to him. But when the defense, I think, or someone asks Erik on the stand, like, did you want this to stop? I mean, he's talking about giving his dad oral sex.
Right.
And he says no. He said, I didn't. And
Yeah.
the prosecutor said, why? Or the
Oh yeah. Yeah.
defense
Yeah.
attorney says, why? And he's like, because that was the only time we got alone with my dad. And, it made him seem like he loved us. And
Yeah.
then that was heartbreaking and totally understandable. Totally understandable that he would, that like the psychological torture that these boys went through, if you were growing up believing that love has to be earned from your parents, and the only way to do that is if you do what they want, then of course they're not looking at it as abuse. And they're also embarrassed because they know it's abuse, let themselves continue to be abused, and they're boys by their dad. And they have to represent this
And
like perfect family. Like, fuck, dude. Fuck.
no, I mean, I have to say, like we've watched so many documentaries, we've talked about so much stuff, including sexual abuse on the show and others, and like this was and I started crying. Like I was like
I was
really
so upset.
upset to watch. And to your point, Darren, you're so right because to recap it about your childhood and go through that is one thing. But then what you're also asking them to do live on court TV is as grown men accept, acknowledge, and review and recap the worst moments of their life. And I'm sorry, like watching them break down and like stutter to say the words. I mean, it was such a it was one of the first times where I was like, God damn, like there is true fucking evil in this world when it comes to this type of stuff. And to see these people have to go through the worst feeling. And by the way, let me also just say they talk about the Me Too movement a little bit towards the end of this.
Yeah.
Like this is what women have been trying to say for generations because the perception is, they experience this probably, I'm assuming, on the whole, a lot more than men do. But the point is, you're
It's
asking
hard
people
to
to
say
go through the
because
whole process.
I was going to say it's hard to say because probably men don't admit it because they're more
That's what
embarrassed
I'm
by
trying
it
to
than women
say.
are. But
Exactly.
yes, to your point,
You
sorry to
could tell
interrupt. Yeah.
it's okay. You could tell that the pain was so very palpable. And one of the things I found really interesting, I don't want to like gloss over this moment though, because it was so impactful for me. Like I just had such a heavy heart about it. And I just sitting at my on my couch, just like crying, like, my God, like could anyone possibly see these emotional reactions and think they're making this up? But anyway, what I want to say is the interesting thing that happened with the Pamela Bozanich person was towards the end of the conversation about the first trial. She says that the defense fabricated everything and that if she were an immoral person, she would have fabricated it the same way. And I was like, are you talking about the mental and emotional breakdown that these two men had on the
Yeah, I didn't
stand?
get what they fabricated. I don't
Yeah,
really
what's the
understand.
fabrication
Like,
there?
there was just really no. And listen, she has a job to do. And let's just be honest here. Prosecutors have a hard time admitting when they're wrong, and they have a
Yeah.
hard time retrying cases because the burden of proof is on them. So they don't want to admit that they did something wrong or did something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very very weary of prosecutors in general. And I know that
Yeah.
we have one running for president, but I'm just saying, like, I am weary of prosecutors' motives and their ability to when something is wrong
Yeah.
about that. But the regardless of like the family members' testimonies, like even if Lyle and Erik were so psychotic and psychopathic that they could lie about this and manipulate, and there are people that do that. You know, there are really good people
Yeah.
who are able to manipulate their way out of it. The fact that their stories have kind of kept the same over the years, the fact that they told, and I'm blanking on her name, but their cousin, who they were really close
Yeah.
with,
Yeah.
admitted it, talked about it with the therapist. And I
Yeah.
thought it was really interesting that
Right.
Lyle and Erik, especially like when they were questioned by police, just kept saying how great their dad was. So on when you're watching this testimony go down, not only do they have to admit that they were sexually abused,
Right.
they almost wanted the abuse to continue because that was how they got close to their dad. But now they're also mourning. Like it when they say that their dad was a great
Yes.
man, they have to mourn the idea that their family isn't that way. And they've been portraying that for the entire time. That is
Exactly.
so fucking hard to
Yeah,
do.
and and by the way, not only is it hard to do, they probably don't know how to act because for the first time in their lives, their abuser, the person that was controlling their lives, I mean, Erik tried to go away to school and he wasn't allowed to do that. For the
Right.
first time in their lives, they are entering the world without their abuser controlling their every fucking move, without the rain cloud of their abuser, controlling every single thing they do, say, and feel. Like from a psychological human perspective, has that even been, like, fully studied, let alone tried on court TV? Like, what?
Well, I think about this a lot because I watch Chimp Crazy, and I know that this, like, in a
Okay, where are
weird
we
way,
going here? Yes.
when animals are bred in captivity and then you put them in the wild,
Yes.
they can't really function because they don't know how to deal, even though it's better for them to live in a free society and out in the open in a jungle and in this in a sanctuary. If they
Yes.
were bred in captivity, it's actually very dangerous for them to do that. They usually die, they usually get beaten, they can't keep up with it, right? Like
Yeah.
domesticated animals aren't meant to do that.
Yeah.
In
It's
a
the same
way,
thing, yes.
Erik and Lyle
It
were bred
is.
in captivity and they didn't know what
Exactly.
to do with their freedom. They didn't have any tools without a dictator above them telling them when to shit and when to
Yeah.
fucking get down on their knees, when to eat,
Right.
tennis stars, all this stuff. I mean, just the abuse when they were talking about him, like to get them to
On
stop
the
crying,
pole,
hanging
yeah.
from a pole. I mean, the like literally, I mean, not to call them, I mean, I know we're all animals, but not to call them animals, but they were
No,
treated
but
like
it's,
animals.
they
Like
were,
they were
yeah.
bred in captivity. And if you think about the mindset of a chimp or a gorilla who is 98% similar to a human, I don't understand why the same wouldn't react to humans. It's not like when
Exactly.
Elizabeth Smart got back to her family, all of a sudden she was like, hey, okay, and great. Like it took years of
Yeah.
therapy to her to get out of that. Years. And now she's a victim advocate for all of that stuff. But she talks about this and the grooming, and it's just like, and let me just say, if Lyle and Erik, okay, like prison isn't meant, we've talked about this before, for reforming the person for when they get out, right? In my opinion, it just creates more criminals. When Lyle and Erik talk about what they've been doing in prison and talking about child abuse and paying it forward to people and actually
Yeah.
making like making lives of themselves,
Yeah, getting degrees and
isn't
yeah,
this why we put people in prison? To rehabilitate them, to become better
absolutely.
citizens of society after 35 years?
Yeah.
After they've admitted it, they've talked about it. They've never gotten into one. They were never in a crime before this. They haven't beaten people up in prison. They're not trying to, they don't have their wealth. Like, can't we as a society say that this is as rehabilitated as they go? What is the point of rehabilitating people if we're not even giving them the opportunity to be rehabilitated? They're almost the
Yeah.
perfect example of just seeing what this can do.
They really are, yeah. I
So
mean,
it's
from what
just
we see, yeah.
tragic.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much tragedy around this case. You
And
know,
it's hard.
oh,
It's sorry,
no, go ahead. Go.
because Innocence Project, right? It takes DNA, and exonerates people using DNA, right? Where the evidence that was
Mm,
tried in court does not line up.
hmm.
Here is so different because there is evidence that they killed them, but maybe intention should matter. What
Yeah,
they
you're
went through matter, like how do we factor in that? Because now, and to their point, like, yes, they were on trial for murdering their parents, of which they are guilty, right? Like, but I wonder if there can be another like post trial to be like, okay, yes, they are guilty and they should be punished because murder isn't a result of something, right? Like, there
yeah.
should be something for that. But like, maybe there was a reason, and maybe the sentencing, the punishment should fit the crime a little bit. Like, can the Innocence Project step in to be like, yes, we know that they're guilty of murder, but here's why they're not murderers, kind of thing.
Right,
Like, it's
right, right.
so interesting when the evidence lays out that they've killed someone, but that doesn't mean that they should be in prison now. And there's like a hole for people like that and the population like that
It's
it doesn't seem to be solved.
and it's so clear that the sentencing was impacted by the O.J. Simpson situation and Rodney King and things like that. Like, there was a clip throughout at some point in the documentary towards the end where a local news station was reporting on the guilty verdicts of the second trial, and you hear this guy go, quote, "A much needed victory for the DA after losing the O.J. Simpson
Right.
case," and I'm like, a victory for the DA,
Right,
like,
right. This is not
and
a victory for anyone. And the
yeah,
fact that
what's
they
the victory
celebrate that
here?
as a result of that and the public just takes that is gross. The whole thing is fucking gross
Yeah.
to me. I mean, the fact, how could you not? It's just, these are just a perfect example of probably rehabilitated people that can
Well,
go out there now and live their fucking lives. They're in their 50s, for fuck's sake. Like,
yeah,
without the possibility of parole seems cruel.
and Eric even, you hear him talk about the tragedy and how it's all his fault as well, and he takes blame for Lyle's participation in this because this was all really Eric's kind of, mindset. He says, quote, "I do worry, and I think it's important that the seriousness of my crime not be minimalized or diminished. Quote, every aspect of this tragedy is my fault." So, what more can you ask from a person?
Yeah, I don't understand what more they could possibly do. Like, yes, they murdered
Yeah.
their parents. It's like I just don't like I don't understand the point of this case and what we're trying to do in the prison system outside of punishing people. If we're really trying to rehabilitate members of society, which I think it behooves us to do, and some people can't be rehabilitated. But these guys, after
Yeah, shouldn't
34 years,
shouldn't there be some sort of psychological examination after 34 years with a case like this where not even just this case, I'm saying for all prisoners, frankly, that are maybe sentenced to life, to take one more look? Can we just maybe and like, I feel like for the people that really should stay there, like, that should be very clear, right? Like, there shouldn't be nuance to that. I don't know. And before we, like, wrap up, because, I think we've touched on every part of this incredible Netflix documentary out on October 7th, the Menendez Brothers. See, that's
yeah,
me plugging.
I like you
Um,
plug. Yeah.
one of the things I thought, and not to go back to the sexual abuse of it all, but I just didn't want to forget this. You know, the emphasis on the Oprah episode where she did nothing but an
Yeah.
audience of male sexual abuse survivors. You know, I forget if it
They were
was
all
Lyle or
holding up their pictures
yeah,
of when they were sexually abused in the
yeah, the
audience,
age
these
that
the
they
men.
were. Yeah,
Yep.
which was so unbelievably powerful. But one of the brothers who are in jail says, that was 16 years after we testified. So that gives the example of like how different, you know, or I guess you could say like how the progress was being made around male sexual abuse. And let me also just say this. I know men in my life that are around my age who have confided in me that they have been sexually abused.
Mm.
And hearing what not even just hearing, seeing, hearing, and understanding the way Lyle and Erik shared their stories is why I was crying on my couch, because I saw the exact parallels to the conversations I've had with somebody, and knowing the pain, and by the way, knowing not just the pain of what was happening in that moment, but the ripple effect that that action has throughout a life, throughout a lifetime, is so unbelievably chaotic that it's I can't I won't speak for it. I won't speak for that person, and I have not experienced that myself, but the point of I'm trying to make about the Oprah thing is that 16 years after they testified, Oprah has this conversation in the early 2000s on her show. And I would say that we weren't even close to the general understanding and acceptance of what that meant to people. But Oprah,
Yeah.
that, and as influential as she was, I believe was a very important part of having this conversation where we can now in 2024 say, oh no, boys are
This is
getting
why
molested and sexually abused in similar, and not more ways than other people.
the younger generation has brought up the Menendez brothers. It's just being
Exactly.
like sort of falling through the cracks. But I mean, like, listen, as we wrap this up, what's like the number one common thread? Even like interviewing psychiatrists and people who were really dive into sexual abuse, specifically with children. They said on the show, like the number one quality of serial killers is usually that they were horribly treated when they were kids by their parents.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for
Or
sure.
sexually abused themselves. I mean, R. Kelly was sexually abused by his aunt. Like, there's a pattern. And that's not to say that every sexual assault victim obviously goes to be a murderer, but maybe every murderer ends up being assaulted
Yeah.
by their parents or treated some way, like in some sort of fashion. If these guys were really killers, I think we would have seen early signs of them not only behaving badly, but just like killing animals, torturing certain things. There was none of that.
Yeah, there's
There's
no
literally none of
profile
that.
about that at all. And I want to
Nothing.
add to what you're saying, the person with whom who shared their very personal story with me also made it clear that this was a generational abuse situation where they
Yeah,
know
he
that the
wasn't the first
person,
one.
he was
Right.
not the first one, the
He got
person
abused by
before
someone who was
him
also
who was
abused. Yep.
also abused. And that is by no means, by the way, an excuse or justification or a get out of jail free card.
But it's an explanation.
It does explain the situation to a point where, okay, people can maybe think about that and try to stop that kind of generational abuse. There's all kinds of generational abuse that happens that isn't just sexual. Um, but the sexual part of the generational abuse stayed quiet for so long in our society. And now we're having these kind of conversations that hopefully bring it out into the open. People are understanding and educating themselves more on it and know how to look for problems and flags and hints that it could be happening so that they can stop it in its tracks.
Yep.
Daryn, I want to know what your final thoughts are in a second. I'm going to read off a couple of the end card title cards that happened at the end of the episode that I think are really
Yeah.
important to this case. They say in the Menendez Brothers documentary that in May 2023, Erik and Lyle filed a habeas petition seeking to vacate their murder convictions. The judge asked the district attorney to respond, and they are awaiting a decision. So that's been over a year. I want to double check and make
Yep.
sure that's May 2023, by the way. Is that what you have as well? In
Yes, I
your
do.
okay. I just want to make sure I didn't like think that was 2024. And then of course, I'm really glad they included this. And if you guys are listening, if you or someone you know has experienced sexual abuse, information and resources are available at www.wannatalkaboutit.com. We're going to link to it in the show notes so that anyone who may need it can click it. But I'm glad
Yep.
they included that. And most documentaries, whenever you're talking about this type of stuff, do, but I couldn't help but think about my own feelings, like I was just explaining, who will be honest with you, I've never experienced sexual abuse myself, but I really sympathize and empathize with my friend that shared that with me. And I'm like, imagine if that person was sitting on this couch watching this and how triggered they would have felt. Like, so, and it's something
A
that
lot of
adults,
shame. A lot of shame. Not only
oh,
with girls,
oh
but a
my
different type
God.
of shame with boys. Like, it's
Oh
just
my God.
different. And boys aren't
It is
one
different.
to talk
Yeah.
about anything. There's this view of being weak.
Yeah,
with men, that women don't necessarily have the same, although obviously it's hard to come forward in any type of case. So I'm not saying it's harder for boys. I'm just saying it's a little different.
it
And
is. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, like my final thoughts about this case, about this
Yeah.
documentary, really well done documentary, but just
Very
fucking
good. Yeah.
tragic. And I don't think
Yeah.
that they should be in prison anymore. I think they've served. I think they've served their time. I think that they are
Yeah.
rehabilitated into society. I think that if a jury is deliberating for a month and all of a sudden comes back unanimously, given the fact that this is a win for the DA after finding
High
OJ not guilty,
fives. Yeah.
I I think if you have a jury that's deliberating for a month, that should say something about the evidence at hand of whether or not we should have these people be serving life without parole.
I agree. My final thoughts are very similar. I will just say that if Gypsy Rose can walk free, what's stopping? I mean, obviously different sentencing. I'm just saying on a very like ethical, moral standpoint. If we
Yeah,
were
because
to
I don't know if Nick Godejohn is walking free, but yeah,
no, no, no,
like,
no.
but if
But
she is, then
yeah,
there's a case here to be made for
there's
the Menendez
something
brothers.
to be thinking about in that regard. Yeah. So we will of course be on top of this. We're going to make sure any updates. I have a hunch that this documentary and this Monsters scripted series is going to get this conversation going again, which I'm sure was the intention of these documentaries and these and this stuff. But yeah, we're gonna keep an eye on this one and of course update you guys with anything that comes. And we want to hear what you guys think
Yes.
too. Let us know what you think about the case. Do you think they should just stay in jail forever because they've killed somebody? We hear
Let
you.
us
We're not
know.
yeah, let us
Yeah.
know what you think at Thrasher at Carpe Daryn. Hit us up on our Facebook group, or hit us up on Patreon if you're one of our Patreon listeners.
Should we end with something more
Yeah, let's be a
positive?
little more positive. Sure. Yeah.
I love this. Our friend Coco in the Facebook group says, just saw the McDonald's Happy Meal toys right now. We're mini Crocs. Mom, are you getting any?
She
John,
asked, Mom, are you getting any? And I responded to her in the Facebook group, but I'm going to let
have you
everyone know.
eaten anything but McDonald's in order to get these things for the past?
Excuse me. Excuse me. Do I have 4 Croc toys in my possession? Maybe. Do I have one right here in my hand and I'm showing people on Patreon and on
Oh,
YouTube?
so you have literally bought 4 Happy Meals just to get these
Okay,
Crocs?
let me stop
Yes, you
you right
did.
there. Let me
Yes, you
stop you right
did.
there. No.
Podcast ended. Yep.
Well, yes, I did. But let me just be clear. I only wanted one.
Nope.
Let me start with I only wanted one. And I saw it. I'm sorry. Are you fucking look
I mean,
how
it's
fucking cute it
adorbs.
is.
It's adorbs. It's a mini Magic Croc.
It is. Yes. Oh my God. I should put
So
him in the Crocs.
you needed 4 for Magic, right?
I didn't
That's what
even
you're
think
about to
about that.
say?
Well, what happened
Wow.
was I went back for another one. Okay. I had 2 Happy Meals. Did I eat everything in the Happy Meal? Probably not. I'm not a big, I'm not a big McDonald's. Darren's making a face. I'm not a big
I could
McDonald's person.
who couldn't eat a Happy Meal?
I don't know. I just don't like, I don't know. It's McDonald's. I don't know. Anyway, my point that I'm trying to make is
Oh
one of
Lord.
my friends texted me and was like, have you seen the Crocs that are at McDonald's? And I was like, yes, I have 2 already. Why is everyone hitting me up about these things? I'm sure it's because you and I talk about Crocs all the time and we wear them.
Have you
Um,
met you?
I know. Have you met me? But my friend really wanted the blue one, and they only have one of like the 6 or 7 of them are blue. She was like, I really want the blue one. Well, you know me. The same thing happened with Funko Pops. I was collecting them. I tried to stop myself, and then I started buying them for other people to fulfill the addiction, the need of purchasing them. So when I found out that she wanted the blue one, I'm like, I'm on a mission. I have an excuse to buy a Happy Meal now. I have an excuse to get the delight of opening the bag and seeing
It
which
is
one I
so
get.
fun.
It
Yeah.
is fun. Well, I am happy to say that it only took the 4th try and I was able to get the blue one. So I now own 3, 2 of which are the same as this one if you're watching on YouTube or on our video. And the 4th one was blue, and I'm going to give it to my friend, and that's all I'm going to do with the Crocs. Although you are
I
convincing
haven't.
me to get a 4th one for Magic to wear them. So maybe I
You kind
will.
of need
Because his
to.
little paw would fit like perfectly in
I
there.
know.
Okay, I might do
Imagine that
that.
would go viral. I'm just saying he
It
would
really
hate
would.
you, but like probably worth it for like the minute or two that it
It
would.
would be. It would be.
Yeah.
Also, what a great, from a business standpoint, what a great
Well, it
toy
has someone who
partnership.
I was gonna say it has someone. We did this with Pharrell's Cactus Plant Flea Market had these like 4 characters that were going around, and if you got like a Big Mac meal or like the 20
Oh
piece chicken McNugget,
yeah.
so Nadine was like, "You're fucking getting every single character," and like we even tried to buy the characters, and they were like, "No."
Yeah, you
And so I
have
was
to,
just
yeah.
giving out McDonald's to like the entire lower half of Manhattan for like 3 weeks because Nadine desperately wanted all these characters. So
Oh,
it was
that's cute.
a great
I should
marketing
mention
tool.
they're a keychain, so they are cute to have like just around, maybe a clip on your bag or something,
Like even I don't give a shit about it, but I want to go buy a Happy
I
Meal
don't
just
want to
to
get
see
one.
which one I get.
Yeah, maybe you should. Honestly, do that and put it on
Okay.
Patreon so our listeners on Patreon will know. Okay, one more thing here. Our friend Brittany Goodman mentioned that she has a big celebration happening
Woo.
on our Facebook group saying, quote, I would love for my fourth birthday shout out in a row
Oh shit,
from mom
Brittany.
and dad. My birthday is October 8th. I recently was in the hospital and they discovered more
Mm.
health problems along with my existing heart condition. I now have an enlarged spleen and I was diagnosed with a liver disease I didn't know I had. Oh, Brittany, I'm so sorry. The entire time I was in the hospital, any chance I could, I'd catch up on my episodes. You both take me to
Ah.
my happy place of peace. I could almost start crying. I absolutely love you. I don't think you realize how much you affect my life in such a positive way. I am literally holding myself from crying right now. I just
Yeah,
want you
this is
guys
the
to know
sweetest
this.
thing.
I love listening to John and Daryn Carp. Please never stop doing what you do. Brittany, you did not have
Happy
to,
birthday,
you did not have to,
Miss Goodman. Happy
go ahead.
birthday to
To
you.
you. There you go.
There you go.
Brittany, so sorry to hear you're going through that and your kind words. You did not have to say all that to get a birthday shout out. Just know that we are very thankful for your listenership and we
Very
hope you
thankful.
recover and have a billion more birthdays coming up.
Absolutely. We really appreciate all of you guys. It's just so amazing. And thank you for a
And
nice note. And if you need a mini croc, I know a podcast partner of mine that might have
I
one
should
for you,
send her one.
Brittany. Yeah.
Also, if you guys are listening, go to our Facebook group and give Brittany some love. She's been through a lot.
She deserves it. And as a reminder, guys, please check out our Patreon to help support our show directly. Your support means the world to us. So you can sign up for as little as $5 a month or even cheaper if you sign up annually.
That's right.
And click the link in our show notes. We make it super easy for you, or go to patreon.com/shaken and disturbed.
That's right. And Daryn, I'm going to sign off a little differently this week. Make sure you take your Zyrtec and wear your Crocs. How you like
Oh
that?
God, I'm
How you
signing
like
off by
that?
saying if I don't have a picture of Magic in his Crocs by the time, if you don't go and get a fourth fucking Happy Meal,
Yeah,
if
I
we can
will.
give Brittany her fourth birthday shout out, you can go out and get a fourth,
You're
fifth
right.
fucking Happy Meal,
You're
John.
right. That's a
You
good
can do it
point.
for the
And
people. Thank
I'm going
you.
to do it. Listen, let's both do it and we'll both upload. Send me the picture of your Croc and I'll upload it to Patreon. And we can see if,
Fine.
what if we get matching Crocs and we have matching Crocs from across the country? Oh, all
Oh.
right. We've had
All
enough.
right.
See you guys
Huh.
next time. Thank you, Netflix.
Bye.
Don't forget to check it out October
Yeah.
7th. Bye bye.
Bye.